Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Life Sound Podcast. My name is Ben Hammond, and over the coming weeks, months, years, who knows, we're going to be talking to some of the industry's leading professionals. We're going to be talking to front of house engineers, monitor engineers, systems techs, PA company professionals, product guys, everything you can imagine from every element of the live sound profession. I've been lucky enough to be a touring front of house engineer for the last 12, 13 years. So I've reached out to a lot of my friends, people that I've toured with, people that I've worked with, people that we've worked for the same bands. And, you know, the idea of this is it's just a place for people to talk about what they do, their approach to it, their experiences, tell some stories, share tips and tricks. It's not about products. It's not about selling anything. It's not about any of that. It's just a place where we can all go, hopefully learn and hopefully improve ourselves. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Brad Madix. The man's CV reads like a rock and roll Hall of Fame, and he certainly knows how to tell a story. I really enjoyed doing this one, and I hope you guys do too. So welcome to the Live Sound Podcast, and today I have here with me Brad Madix. And we're just going to have just a general chat about everything, really. So, if how's the weather over there? Nice and sunny.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful day. Very, very clear. All the dust and pollution and everything is gone away. At least so temporarily. It's one good thing. I was walking the dog the other day, and we were hearing coyotes, and there were turkeys running across the road. And I think it's already happening, man.
Yeah, it's not quite as exotic in York, but we'll keep hoping so. So I suppose, you know, as we were just saying, you know, the idea behind this is just a very kind of non-brand specific, you know, just generally going through, you know, how you got started and your career highlights, and you know, and just kind of letting people know about you, really. So,
Okay, great.
If we kind of go back to the beginning, really, and you want to tell us how you got started with things and how.
Sure. I was a keyboard player back in like the late '70s, playing in bands in high school, and I went to college in Boston, and got really into sort of right then. MIDI was coming into play a lot, and there were some new, more affordable synthesizers on the market. So I got into programming that, and we're doing a lot of cover band stuff. So I really focused on, you know, copying the sounds, sort of like early '80s. So like the Cars and really like dialing in sounds, and found that I sort of gravitated towards the audio end of things. That's, you know, one reason was really focusing on the way things sounded on records and what people were doing specifically in keyboard world to begin with, but then just generally also. And that I had kind of amassed over the years a pretty substantial keyboard rig, and part of it was these two giant Yamaha speakers and a big Yamaha amp, and I started renting it out to little bands. I think I had like a PV mixer or something, and we were making a record of our own, like writing some songs, and we were borrowing a bunch of gear from a local sound company in Boston to record. So like a little bit bigger console and a multi-track, I think an 8-track reel-to-reel, and we were going on our way up to New Hampshire, where we had a week-long gig, and during the day we were going to record demos. And our truck got stolen. Like the night before the gig, we loaded it all up and parked it up, and some bastard stole the truck. And felt really personally responsible, because I talked to the sound company owner, and they were basically giving us the gear for the week. So I offered him to start working for him, basically for free, to sort of pay back. And one thing led to another. I wound up going out on tour. This was in my senior year of college, and I wound up going out on tour with a band called John Cafferty, the Beaver Brown Band, and I was like the I guess what you would call a system tech now, but I was really like the only sound crew guy. Just set it up and make it work every day, and drive the truck also. And I really never looked back from there. I made friends with the tour manager, who asked me to come out with another band, the Psychedelic Furs. I was mixing monitors for them. The next tour they did, I mixed front of house. And in the meantime, their sound company asked me to go out with Def Leppard, same thing on the sound crew, and made friends with those guys. And I wound up later on mixing them. Their opening act on the tour was Queensryche. I did, at the time, I did monitors for those guys, and then I wound up moving to front of house, and just kind of snowballed. I never wound up finishing college. Just kind of went on with that career. And as you know, it's very much who knows who sort of networking kind of business. So just meeting and I had chops from college in the studio, some of which are helpful live, more now than then, I think. But
it's an interesting thing, and you know, there's always that kind of thing of studio guys can't mix live and live guys can't mix studio thing. I think it's I mean, I never agreed with it anyway, because you know, I'm sure if you put a Formula One driver in a rally car, they'd still give you a run for their money. You know, it's
right, yeah,
same skill, but there's always, you know, for me it was like studio give you that really detailed understanding of audio and gear, and live taught you how to do it quick.
Sure, and that's totally valid. I think there was a time early in my career where there was gear you wouldn't think about bringing out on tour, but you started to see that attitude sort of go by the wayside in the early 90s, especially, where you started to see, you know, Manley compressors getting taken out, and 1176s and racks, and that attitude. I mean, you definitely saw more crossover. I think there was a time early in my career where you would say it was probably more difficult to make the transition from the studio to live, but just because you could get away with things in the studio because of the isolation, that you really couldn't live. But those things started to merge, I'd say, substantially in the mid-90s, where you really started to see a lot of crossover. And I'd say now there's plenty of people who succeed in both worlds.
Well, I think it's got to the point, technology, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but especially with what you're doing as well, you know, like years ago, it was, you wanted to record a show, it was a broadcast truck, it was multiple crew, it was, you know, it was a huge operation. And now it's a case of a piece of Cat 5 cable, and more often than not, the front of house guy hitting press go, you know, hit record.
Right.
You know, it seems to be, certainly from my point of view, it seems to be you know, you're not just the front of house guy anymore. You're also the recording guy, and then you're also the guy the band or the management call and say, hey, we need a version, you know, social media. And things.
Right, that's just happening to me right now, actually. I got a project that Florence The Machine wants to release online. I think so we're going back, pulling out some multi-tracks, and doing a little fixing up. It's mostly mastering.
Yeah, pretty much every show now exists on a hard drive somewhere.
Right, I'm got 2 16 terabyte hard drives full of Florence The Machine. So I'm basically every show of the tour.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just a perfect example of a time where they're dipping back into that, you know, for something. And I think that social media is a perfect example of why it's a good idea to archive these things, because you never know when you want to put out a minute or a song, or.
And especially when we're in at the moment where everybody's now, you know, in a time where they can't go out and play shows, everybody's now.
Right, which is exactly what brought this up, was that, well, you know, we can't do shows for people, but we want, you know, they want to put something in front of people, if, you know, just even if just for their entertainment, you know.
You could just break up if Groundhog Day.
Yeah. But it's true. You're, you know, as a front of house engineer, you're basically, I mean, you're the record engineer, the mix engineer, mastering engineer, sort of doing it all at one time. Just got an email from somebody about 3D live streaming, which adds a whole other. I mean, I'm not sure how we're going to approach that yet exactly, but it's adds a whole other layer
Just
because you're also doing broadcast.
What's your kind of view on that? Because obviously at the moment, with there being this, there not really being any kind of end date to this, and in what state things will be when we get to the other side of this, it's whether mass gatherings, not specifically even festivals, but putting 3,000-4,000 people in a room together at the moment seems to be the last thing on anybody's mind. I think
I'd say
social things get relaxed. Do you think streaming, ticketed streaming events, I think, do you think that's going to be the way forward for at least,
Yeah, well, it's been the topic of conversations lately about, I think at some point they may kind of relax this. I mean, we're technically in shelter in place. You're not supposed to leave your home at all, although you have to. I think they may relax that to a point where, we don't want 10,000 people in an arena together, but maybe we can get a crew together in a soundstage and do something. And that has come up, and we've had talks about doing that. So that might be the next step. I mean, boy, Ben, it's just impossible.
But
I mean, who knows? Who knows how this is all going to unwind? It's. I mean, I think for the next several weeks, we're probably not talking about doing anything.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Hopefully, sooner rather than later, we're getting back out there and doing live shows. But that may be the next step: is something virtual, in a smaller setting.
Yeah. So just to go back, slightly back in time again, but so you mentioned things like, being put on larger tours and stuff by the company working. What was that kind of first big gig, or what was that first thing that you thought, this could be the way forward, this could be what I want to do, this could be a job,
Yeah, I think when I moved from mixing monitors to front of house with psychedelic furs, it's kind of, I had an interesting moment with my father at a show. I wouldn't go so far as to say he disapproved of what I was doing exactly, because he was into music himself, but he was a professor in chemical engineering professor, and I think he thought he wanted me to be more academic. But he came to a psychedelic furs show after I started mixing front of house, and I remember sort of seeing. It was a time when I was feeling like, oh, this is really something I want to do. I really enjoy the lifestyle. I really enjoy the job. And I sort of remember seeing a light go off in his mind also about, oh, wow, this is, it's a little more technically and complicated than I thought it was. And that it was an enjoyable, and I think he met the band, and, it made it real for him. That was really a turning point for me. When I was a little kid, my dad, like 10, my dad was a guitar player also, and he was actually recording in a studio, and I used to go with him, and I had no idea what was going on other than a lot of lights, and it was cool, and I used to fall asleep next to the rack in the back corner, and I look back on that. I didn't know it at the time, but I look back on that. That was kind of when it first got its hooks in me, But that would have been 1987 or so, and I'd kind of been doing it for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Always, I still had in my head I was gonna be in a band and play and make music. And then another thing was that I got offered a part in a touring band, and it was in the band, and it was actually less money than mixing.
So you're not supposed to talk about.
Yeah, that was another sort of fork in the road in my career.
Yeah. So obviously bringing us back to now. I mean, your CV pretty much reads like rock and roll royalty, really, from from Florence The Machine, like I said earlier, to Rush, and to Van Halen, all kinds of people. Obviously, a guy at your level, there's going to be a lot of people listening to this, hopefully, at all kinds of levels at the very start of their career and things like that. If you could give somebody kind of one piece of advice or pass on the most important thing you've learned on your way up, not necessarily about gear or technique, but potentially, how to present yourself or how to best progress, or if you could give people, one piece of desert island advice.
If I was going to have to be one piece of advice, I would say, I don't think that you have to be a musician to be a good engineer, although you do have to train your ears. And I think most people could do that.
Yeah.
But you do need to be able to speak to musicians in a musical way. Because part of your job is going to be translating what they did musically into engineering terms, frequency ranges, and also knowing in certain parts of songs which instruments are featured. I mean, sort of like for an obvious example, the guitar solo comes in, you need to be on it. So I think you need to be able to speak in terms of like song forms. And I think if you can stand in front of an artist and have that conversation with them about, well, how about in the bridge, what are we looking for in the bridge of the song? And here's what I hear. You'll get feedback from them. Obviously, they'll tell you, well, what the intention was. But I think when you can start to give feedback also, I mean, sort of pseudo-produce the live aspect of the performance,
I think
that's really like key to cementing your role with any artist,
Listen, I think that's a really key thing, to be able to take it away from the CD and still obviously completely respect how things are put together and how the artist, because they were in a studio for months and months and these pieces fit together that particular way, because and that's the way they put them together, and you have to respect that, but at the same time kind of put a twist on it that makes it a little bit more interesting, makes it a little bit more involving, more encompassing for a live show. And I think, like you say, if you can talk to an artist on that level and gain their respect and show them that you have taken an interest and understand their music and are willing to bend with it, rather than just, this is what the CD sounds like, here's my console, here's all my plugins, I've replicated exactly what you've done. And I think it's really important that a show has a personality, and that's something that I think an engineer can massively bring to play.
For sure. And I think people would be shocked at how often you sit in rehearsals with a band and they're learning the songs.
Yeah.
I mean, they've gone through a process, of months and months of being in a studio.
But in some cases, it was potentially years ago and they haven't played those songs since.
Sure. And they're just visiting that music from a performance point of view. And, it can really be, you have to be respectful because it is their music, but it can be really helpful to them to communicate in a way that's like, well, maybe if you sing that part, I don't know, if you sing that part differently, or maybe if the guitar lays out for that part, even if it's not what happened on the record exactly. But just to be able to have that conversation.
Well, that's you're hearing that distant picture. They're sat there with more often than not the very me-centric monitor mix, and for you to be able to sit back and listen to everything, how everything puts together when you haven't potentially got all of those overdubs and all of those layers that you have in the studio, and think it puts you in a better position to be able to say, right, well, that part's potentially not moving as it should. Maybe we could put something here, or maybe we could do something with this. And again, if you have that level of trust and respect for you, then you're going to be able to, like you say, almost get into a point of producing a live show with the artist.
For sure. And a lot of bands come to the table with tracks now, stems from the record, and often they're useful. Sometimes they're too much. It's another conversation that can be had, like, what if we strip this part out of there? Or usually I find it sort of more than you need, my opinion, but again, the point is to be able to have those conversations with the artist in, in a musical way. And it's really goes back to putting on the records and listening to them and trying to figure out how they were done. I remember I worked with Shania Twain for a bit about 15 years ago, and Mutt Lange was around quite often. Nigel Green, who produced and engineered a lot of the Def Leppard stuff. And, that was really educational in a lot of ways. But it was about like how those guys originally started out by actually trying to copy other producers like way early in their careers. They were in the studio or even in their homes, like picking apart what other producers had done and figuring out how they had done it, or trying to figure out how to replicate it. And I think that's the basis. It's that listening to music, and I think you develop an ear for, what frequencies are they boosting on things, what frequencies are they cutting on things, how are they placing things in the mix, and then at some point it becomes your own, right? That you start doing it your way. I think you should always respect the record that you're mixing the show from, but it's not always realistic in a live setting, and I am not sure it's always entirely desirable in a live setting. You want it to have a life of its own, not just sound exactly like the record.
And the band aren't going out there most of the time playing exactly to the record. They're
Sure.
as well, and every song has its own identity when it goes into a live
Sure.
song.
So it's, at some point you are going to want to kind of take that and I don't know, we build on it, turn it into your own, give it your own personality. Rush was an interesting example of a band. Like I mixed the last several tours in their career, and especially towards the end, they were pulling out a lot of early songs, and they were tricky because they had their career spanned over 40 years, and you couldn't just play a song off the newer record and then completely switch the sound to what it sounded like in 1976, and then go back to what it sounded like in 1992. It was, you were just going to be, I felt that it was just going to be distracting to the audience. You sort of had to have, here's their sound now.
Yeah.
And then let's pick the key elements of the sounds from those earlier classic recordings, and let's emphasize those, but not completely wipe the slate from song to song to song.
Yeah.
That was eye-opening too, because there were songs that I hadn't paid attention to in ages. I go back and re-listen to and go through that same process of what are the elements, what were they doing? You think, Ben, some of it was just kind of by necessity at the time, right? You did the things you had to do, and then bringing that forward into the 21st century to give a 21st century spin, So
I mean, something like that, where you say where you've got your base kind of personality for the show, but then you're kind of constantly moving over here and there and everything. Are you a snapshot guy, or are you doing?
Oh yeah, big time. And not that, I mean, I use a lot of snapshots are only recalling a little thing, but it's an important, I mean, again, guitar solos are an obvious one.
Yeah.
That to me, if the guitar solo rides up 5 dB on its own, and then it's just a matter of a VCA ride to kind of tuck it in or bring it out a little more on any given night, then that's how I use probably 99% of the snapshots are just little sort of adjustments, but it's that finding what happens in the chorus of this song that makes the song form, what that makes it distinct from the verse.
Yeah.
When you have
any one point, there's that bit that's doing the connection.
Sure, and they're small, but they're important. And there's a lot of faders to be touching all the time. For me, it's easier just to hit next, even if I have to do it, verse, chorus, bridge.
Yeah.
Chorus out. I mean, even if it's just sort of a basic layout.
But it's, isn't it, against the, being behind an XL4 with your rack of outboard gear, and, even on the best setups, you're still kind of choosing what your priority need to come, prioritizing what you need to compress, and, well, I've got X amount of effects, or, and then obviously we've come into the digital age now where you can have essentially, you can be in 10 different places at once with automations, with snapshots, with, much more dynamic processing, dynamic EQs and multi-band compression and all that kind of stuff that, obviously the live shows massively changed from what it used to be. Not saying that the shows didn't used to sound good, but obviously the public perceptions changed on how they want the music to sound. This super hi-fi, super CD quality almost. So, how do you, what was the biggest kind of approach, changing your approach between analog into digital? And do you feel like things have opened up a lot more? Do you think things are more dynamic? Do you think there's more movement, or do you think it's just a different take, or are you still kind of going back to, aiming for sonically kind of what you did back on analog days, or,
Well, I'll say, when I first started mixing on a digital platform, I was definitely trying to make it sound analog, like through inserts, and just like having a distressor across the guitars and little things, right? Over the years, and that would have been early 2002 or so. Over the years, I've kind of just moved into being okay with, doing everything in the digital realm, and there's so much you can do in the digital realm now to make those characteristics happen, like Crane Song Phoenix or any number of waves plugins that kind of give things a character outside of just converting it to digital and mixing it and spitting it back out in digital. But I do think that these days, especially pop music, I'm sort of comfortable with just doing it as though I was just doing everything in the box, and not, and the front end on these consoles is so good now. It's, it's not like early digital days where you were definitely making some compromises.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, there's not a like a A-level digital console out there that doesn't sound great on the preamp stage.
That was it, wasn't it? You were having to use a lot of your, like 50% of your processing or whatever to actually compensate for what the preamp wasn't doing.
Yeah.
Massively reducing the control you then had to do what you wanted to do creatively without stacking more and more plugins and all that kind of stuff on top of it. So,
yeah, I mean, it's my shows these days are really stripped down when it comes to plugins. I've gone from 100 to maybe 25 or 20 or 25 or so. You know what I mean? And 3 or 4 of those are reverbs, which I guess you have to have. But I would never say a bad thing about analog, and I know there are people who swear by it, and I get it. I think the two advantages to digital, and again, not to take anything away from mixing in the analog world. One is in the digital, whatever you need to work on, you can pull up right in front of you. And I'll tell you a story to illustrate that. I went back to mixing all analog when I did Jack White. And I had my pick of the gear. It was an XL4, racks of nice sounding compressors. And I remember one day adjusting a compressor on the vocal, and it happened to be a background vocal. And the compressor was down at the bottom of the rack on the floor. I'm on one knee under the desk, basically, adjusting this compressor. And I remember thinking, what am I even listening to right now when I'm making this adjustment? I mean, I can't even hear where I'm sitting right now, just physically where I'm sitting right now. I can't even hear what's happening to it when I turn this knob. Whereas in digital, you can stay focused and keep your head in the mix. I also remember I was coming into sub for a tour where this was late 70s, and it was two XL4s chained together. And, so it was a 60, 80 inputs or something. And the idea was I was going to go sit in for a week-long run with the engineer. He's going to show me the show, and then I was going to take over. And after a couple shows, he had me sitting in the main chair, mixing on the main console. And he got up and he went over to the other desk and started adjusting the EQ on the hi-hat. And he came sort of back over next to me and said something to the effect, I'll probably misquote this, but something to the effect of, I've been meaning to fix that for months. Because it's literally 8 feet away, whereas with a nav, any of the digital desks, you could just sit it in front of you and work on it and then put it away again.
It's an interesting argument because, you also speak to people as well who say, oh, well, the problem with digital is you end up, everything's in front of you. So you're concentrating on the console and you're not watching the show, so that's interesting what you were saying about that.
And which is a fair criticism. And I think that you can fall into that trap.
Yeah.
I think you just have to, I think it's important to watch the show, at least most of the time, because it's totally a different perspective. Another thing I would advise people to do is get up and walk away from the desk for a minute and see it and listen to it without your hands on a piece of gear, even if it's only for 10 or 15 seconds, because it's also a different perspective. I don't know. Again, I don't mean to say anything bad about mixing it analog. It's a great workflow for certain things in my mind. But I know that it's just a really good way for people. Some engineers like to work that way. I really have gravitated towards, I want to always keep my head in this one place and work on it with the same perspective the whole time. Again, with the caveat of keeping my head up and trying to watch the show. The worst thing about digital is that damn EQ curve popping up every time you twist the knob. Because you would do things in analog that you don't even think twice about.
Yeah.
But you see the curve show up on a screen and it looks horrible.
Yeah, yeah.
But I would say I've done it just as a sort of an experiment years ago. Did some FFT before and after of analog gear as opposed to the curve on a digital console. And I was doing plenty of things in the analog world that would just look horrible if they popped up on a screen. But that was just what everyone was doing. And I mean, including also in the studio, people twiddle knobs until it sounded right. You didn't worry too much about.
Well, that's it. You watch CLA stuff, and he's like, a bit of top end, and he's firing
jacket right,
be like 8K into, but it works, and but you, like you say, you would never do that looking at an EQ in front.
Right. I mean, I'd like to say that was channel 1 on every SSL in the world for 15 years, and it didn't really faze you.
So
that was the sound of a rock pop kick drum,
Yeah. So that kind of brings us into we'll talk about gear for a bit. So obviously the console behind you gives a pretty big clue, and I know you've always been an Avid guy, or I'm assuming the S6 is currently your console of choice.
It is. I just sort of the way timing went. I in my career. I started mixing digital on a PM1D when that first came out. I used the Digico products for quite some time. And there was definitely a time when I would have said the Digico product from front to, beginning to end was the best sounding. And to others' ears, it may still be. I think they're all pretty good at this point. I think I would like to be able to say I could sit in front of a Yamaha or Digico or Midas or an Avid and mix a good sounding show because all the tools are there. As it happened, I sort of fell into mixing on a venue and a profile there when it was first sort of taking off, and became really, really intimately familiar with it. So when it comes right down to it, it's the platform I can get something together the most quickly on.
That's a big swaying point, like you say. Anybody really, any of us should be able to sit behind any console and and get something close to your show. But how important do you think muscle memory is versus sonic quality of a console?
Yeah,
it's be in your office instantly in a throw and go situation, or
Well, I think that being able to, and I have done tours where I've gone back and forth between analog and digital. And in that case, it was going back and forth between an XL4 and a profile. And leaving aside the sonic quality of it, and they're both very good. I could work very, very much more quickly on a profile than I could on the XL4. And just a matter of being able to bring things up in front of you all the time. It goes back to that story of having to bend over and adjust compressor or EQ on something. And
the console's bringing you an effect rather than you moving to them.
Right. Or, I mean, in that case, it was, you literally have to move your body and your head over and then focus on a certain strip. So, I mean, I would say also kind of simultaneous to moving into digital for me. I started getting into recording shows, and for better or worse, Pro Tools is the platform of choice for a lot of post work. So I started to learn my way around Pro Tools and got pretty good at that, and that kind of also lends itself to the Avid platform.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, I've used them all. They all sound good. I say for my way of working, they have pros and cons, but I've subbed in for engineers that were using Digico platform, and I thought we pulled off a very good sounding show. They're all like, to me, it's more about matching the platform with the way you work.
Yeah.
And I guess the front end, they all have sort of a little bit of a different characteristic. So maybe that plays into your thinking about what you choose as a platform. I just think none of them are bad at this point. They're all quite good. And I mean, I've listened back to recordings from all of them, and I'm not sure if you put me in front of one or the other, I could tell the difference if I didn't know what it was.
Well, that's that thing in it, it's the same with the studio, the whole analog versus digital thing. And it's when you actually listen to the product, and like, you're at a show one day and you listen to what's happening in the room, and there's so many different things, the crowd, the temperature, the humidity, the building, the setting you're in, anything that could lend itself or change that overall product. So I suppose being behind something that you're just, utterly comfortable with, to then be able to best adapt to all those kind of things and make sure that with all the inconsistencies that we have around us, that you can still achieve your kind of, your consistent show.
Right. And I think, just speaking about the studio, I think you might have an entirely different mindset if you knew you're going into a project that's the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Then you're trying to draw out characteristics from the gear, and you have the time to do it. If I get 2 weeks in rehearsals with the band, I would consider myself lucky. And then it's about quality and speed. I think in those settings, you have to be able to multi-track and play back, because you have to be able to work when the band's not there, which you can do on all these platforms at this point. A little harder to do analog, but it's not out of the question. But that, you alluded to the level of quality, the expectation. Mixing Linkin Park, but we got into some detail in rehearsals that was, talk about little things. There was all sorts of little, rides up and rides down, and the real kick drum drops out and the sample kick drum comes in for parts of songs. I'm not sure I have the mental bandwidth to do all of that, by pushing buttons on the fly. So it's the tool I like, and I kind of came to this from the profile. Just like I said, it all sort of over the course of my career, it all happened because I got into the profile, I got into Pro Tools, and I got in. This came out, I just sort of fell right into that process.
Yeah.
That was already my workflow.
So moving away from consoles then, in an ideal world, speaker system of choice and configuration, is there anything specific that you any kind of specific configurations that you like, or are you happy to work with the systems tech on what he thinks, or are you changing things different,
Yeah, I'm going to totally cop out on you on this answer, because I really strongly believe that there are at least half a dozen perfectly usable sound systems out
there.
Yeah. And, if you're in a normal world where you're talking about going into festivals right about now, and, you don't get to pick what you're going to use. It's one's going to be a K1 or K2, and the other's going to be a D&B. Another's going to be, whatever, go down the line. And I think much like the preamp conversation, they're all perfectly usable. And especially when they have to be set up properly. So the system tech is extremely important. And I've heard, fails on one or the other at one point or another.
Well, that's the question leading into that is, in that situation where you come out of the smaller rooms or whatever, where you turn the PA off, there's still a hell of a lot of noise in the room. Then you start getting into arenas and outdoor festivals and whatever, and you turn the PA off and it goes silent, and you're 100% in control. How important to you then is the right systems tech, whether it be in a position where you're traveling with the PA with their design or their specifications, or to taking a guy into festivals where, as you say, you're in front of different speaker systems every day and he's helping?
Yeah, it's a good system tech make or break you as an engineer, for sure. I've been fortunate the last few years to travel with a handful of guys that are really, really top of the game. And I've learned to shut up and let them do their job, not meddle too much in what they're doing. And I would say if a system tech is like that, really good at their job, you could walk right up and throw the band on it and be good. There's again, I've been lucky. Even in festival situation, we were carrying a really good system tech on Florence. So there was never a day where, and he may have been pulling his hair out, but for me, it was always pretty much throw it up and go. And those things.
He knows what you want and understands exactly over time. It might not be that absolute blank canvas. Some people are obviously tuning the PA or changing the response to suit the act that they're doing, and so he gets
right. I'll say,
I want to walk up to.
I don't know where you were at, but I've really gone from kind of hyping the PA in the low end to let's make it more like flat, and let me really do it on the desk.
Well, that's
I don't know,
consistency as well, isn't it? If you tune regardless of what the PA is doing, if you try your best to tune it to a particular, setting every night, be it as flat as you can get it, and then you're going to open up your show and it's going to sound at least somewhere close to how last night sounded.
Right. And I guess that's maybe just a kind of a progression for me. Like, well, let's make this more like a pair of Genelecs or whatever, right? That it's a good, really, really good reference. And then if I need to hype the low end of the kick drum, I'll hype the low end of the kick drum.
Yeah.
Or I'll turn the subs up or down or whatever. I kind of like think back early in my career, and I think maybe were we doing that because you kind of had to get the performance out of the PA. Again, now I think with the state of the art in subs and hell, even the low end that's coming out of the air, it's pretty full range. And I really find myself more like, if I can let the system tech take it and make it a smooth response, maybe a little bit of hype in the low end, just a touch, and then we'll add the subs in and get them lined up properly. Yeah, I know. I kind of feel like that's. It sounds stupid to say it, but that's kind of where I want to be mixing now. More like let's make this sound like a really big pair of reference speakers.
Yeah.
And mix like that.
Yeah.
But as far as PAs go, I mean, I've toured with D&B, I've toured with the Claire's Co 12, I've done a million shows on K1 and K2, and I mean, who am I leaving out? JBL. I mean, they're all serviceable. I mean, if you're a good engineer, you should be able to make them. I'll put it this way: you shouldn't be out there stomping your feet because you can't make it sound good.
Yeah.
And you don't have the PA you want.
So contrary to that,
yeah.
There's an island piece of gear that you have to have in an ideal world.
It's funny. We were actually on a desert island together. Ben.
We were, yeah. And if we'd have been there, we'd have been a lot safer than where we are now.
I would say I don't have a piece of gear anymore. Specifically, I really, really like the McDSP plug-in package. And the one I find myself using a lot is it's like a 6034 multi-band compressor. I'm horrible with numbers. But it's like a lunchbox, and each band is its own compressor emulation.
Right.
And I kind of use it for the bigger things. I mean, it's actually got a really nice analog. It's kind of a take on the Neve compressor, but multi-band. I've really started strapping that across the left and the right. Even if it's not doing much, I just kind of like what it does to the sound. And really good on vocals also. But I mean, there's so many things out there now. I used to swear by the Smart C2 compressor.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
And I mean, I'd still use it. It's an amazing piece of gear. But I think part of it, because I've done a few tours now where, we're off to Europe. Oh, we're off to South America. And we're off to Japan. And, it was just like, why don't let's make a show in the box.
Yeah.
That I can carry on a key
and I've got
or email to someone. And maybe, so that's kind of got me towards a handful of really go-to plugins as opposed to pieces of gear. However, having said that, there are plugins that are emulating a certain piece of gear. So maybe that Neve compressor is my desert island.
But in plug form, you can have 30 of them instead of. And
I can afford 30.
Yeah. So obviously, you're sat in your headquarters. Do you want to tell us about moving away from wearing your front of house shoes, the Diablo side of things? Yeah.
So Greg Price and I, a few years ago, sort of born out of the frustration of trying to have sound companies to put together multi-track recording systems, kind of concurrently came up with our own Mac-based, at the time, HD Pro Tools recording interfaces, which we were at lunch one day several years ago, and realized we'd both kind of independently invented, it's the wrong word, but sort of cobbled together the same setup. Of course, at the time we were our own best customers.
Yeah.
So we decided to see what the market was for touring Pro Tools systems, starting with the ones we built, and it turned out it was pretty good, pretty strong. So we've kind of built up along the way, say 35 or 40 systems that are currently gathering dust, but they ordinarily would be out there traveling and recording whatever, the Stones or U2 or who have been.
Predominantly Pro Tools based on everything then?
Yeah, I mean, we have done systems that were Nuendo is a thing we do for Yamaha systems because it's a good interface for Yamaha. Again, Pro Tools seems to be what post houses wanted to be handed. So we did sort of specialize in that. But anything that spits out Matty, we can record. And anything we're working on better Dante solutions, but anything that spits out Dante, we can record. So it's been 3 or 4 years now of really rapid development from 4 systems to about 40, I want to say. I don't even know. So, but it's been fun up until the last couple months. Everything shut down, but that's we're in the same boat as everybody else. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one more question because we've been in for an hour now. I know we've gone through various bits of advice and everything like that, but if you could give one thing that would, in your opinion, improve anybody's mix.
Oh, I mean, so it would have to include me. I think that we are far more likely to do too much to a mix than we are to do not enough. And I recently went through an interesting process where I took a set of tracks, and this was in more of a sort of a studio project setting, but I think it applies. And I realized that all the important work, all the really, really big important work that I did to that happened in the first hour. And it's almost as though if you could work on a mix for an hour or so and then stop and then really, really listen and take stock in what you've done, almost the main things that you do on a mix are about balance, about where are the faders, getting your input and output, your gain structure correct, and then where you put the faders. Even before you get into EQing anything, I think we have a way of jumping into the deep end before we take care of the main essential components of the mix, which is, it's all about balance. It's about having that vocal where it needs to sit, having the drums balanced within each other, and then set in the mix where they need to belong. Even if you just sit there and mix in mono for half an hour before you start panning things and don't touch the EQ. And I will include myself in this. I have a horrible habit of being bogged down in the snare drum.
Yeah.
Greg and I have a joke, like we'll often get tracks before a tour starts so we can start building a show file and start dialing things in. And we have a joke between each other. There's week 2 snare, You know what I mean? It's that I would suggest don't get too bogged down in the plugins and the minutia of panning and just kind of run the faders up, put the high pass filters on things that need high pass, maybe get into panning and spend half an hour, 45 minutes with it, and then stop and really step back from the desk and listen to what you've done. Because you've probably done most of what you need to do right there. And then you get into the detail. But don't ever lose that. After 45 minutes or an hour, hit store, because you might want to go back to that. Like you've probably done most of what you need to do right there.
Trust your instinct.
Yeah, well, and always go with your gut.
Yeah.
There you go. There's my one piece of advice that I will try to remind myself to follow.
Nice, great advice. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, my friend. It's been
anytime, Ben. I look forward to seeing the Caribbean again one day.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can stay there for a little bit longer this time and not stop and loading.
No kidding.
Amazing.
Bye,
right. Thank you very much, my friend. Cheers.
Anytime.
Cheers.
Talk to you soon, I hope.
Thanks so much for that, Brad. That was amazing. Really enjoyed that and learned a lot. So hope you guys did too and can take something away from that. And again, thanks so much, Brad, for being a part of this. So over the coming weeks, we're going to be interviewing a ton more people. We're going to be doing some product training. We're going to be doing some webinars. We're going to be hooking up with manufacturers and things like that. We're going to try and do a weekly interview, as you've just seen. But then throughout the week, be doing various different things, things for you to tune into and learn and improve what you're doing, and hopefully just break some of the boredom of the situation we're in at the moment. So please join us next week, where our guest is going to be Dave McDonald, and we're going to be talking about the beginnings of his career through to getting involved with Portishead and his approach with that, up to mixing Adele from the start of her career right through the big albums. This one was a really fun one to do. Dave's a great guy, and I think it'd be something that you guys are really into. So thanks ever so much for tuning in again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.